speed. What is it that makes something go faster? For many, it's a mystery. For Reynard, it's a science.
They had a truly formidable reputation for building class-leading cars. They won on debut in Formula Ford, Formula 3, Formula 3000 and kart. In fact, they ended up turning Formula 3000 into a one-make series in 1993, despite the championship being open to other manufacturers, as Reynard's dominance in the years prior had left teams with no option but to race with Reynard cars if they wanted any chance to win. So with such a strong reputation, what happened when Reynard took the decision to design and build a customer racing machine for the burgeoning LMP class? Well, that's a bit complicated. By the mid-90s, Reynard's IndyCar and kart ventures were beginning to get underway, and with so much being dedicated to that program within the business, the decision was taken to form a separate division to handle pretty much everything else. This was named Reynard Special Vehicle Projects. They built concept cars, aeroplane seats, touring cars and GT cars, including the Dodge Viper GTSR in partnership with Orica, and then for 1997, Don Paynos tasked them with building the Paynos Esperante GTR1.
And Don, when he came into racing with his Paynos GT1 Esperante car, also became heavily involved in motorsport as a promoter and a track owner himself. And he was very much the driving force between the partnership between the American Le Mans Series and European Le Mans as a single race, and the ACO. And that just started to bring the world together in sports car racing, and it created a market. So we went after that market with the knowledge of having raced in the separate series beforehand with the GT1. Well, the plan was to develop a car that could be raced both in Europe and in the USA under the American Le Mans Series and Le Mans. So I'm Kieron Salter. I'm the CEO and founder of the Digital Manufacturing Centre and also KW Motorsport and KW Special Projects. So at this point, I was technical manager of Reynard Special Vehicle Projects. And I'd been technical manager from the point where I'd stopped being chief designer of the Ford Mondeo touring car, and we had a bunch of other programs underneath Reynard Special Vehicle Projects that all had their own individual technical teams, and then I had overarching responsibility for all those.
With Reynard's experience supplying winning customer cars in Formula Racing and IndyCar, as well as having proven capable of building a bespoke endurance racing machine for Paynos, in addition to their involvement with the construction of the original Chrysler Viper GTSR, a customer car built for the burgeoning open-top prototype class seemed like a natural fit. Their first effort, named the 2KQ, would be built for the 2000 season. While the car would be built to the standards of the heavier LMP 900 class, the precursor to LMP1, the goal was to create a car capable of being used in both that and the lighter LMP 675 class too. For those who may not know, the LMP 900 class was defined by a 900 kg minimum weight, and LMP 900 cars could be fitted with more powerful engines than the LMP 675 cars, which were defined by a 675 kg minimum weight and would sport less powerful engines. But the rules were supposed to allow for both classes to be capable of fighting for overall wins. They were more intended as differing approaches than stratified classes. By the time the 2KQ was being developed at the tail end of the 90s, carbon fibre had monopolised prototype race car construction for years, and this one would be no different. Reynard built a brand new carbon fibre tub, and the body too would be an all-carbon affair.
We were pioneering quite a lot of CFD for the development on the aerodynamics as well as wind tunnel testing, so we had a 40% scale model wind tunnel program which was run at the Shrivenham wind tunnel, which was a Reynard tunnel, complemented by CFD techniques. And in addition to that, we had a couple of innovations that were focused on endurance racing and some of the unique aspects of endurance racing, one of those being reliability. And Audi had pioneered at Le Mans around the same time this concept of being able to change the entire back end of their Le Mans car in less than a few minutes during a pit stop, should they need to. And the reason they did that is because it was difficult at that time to build a reliable gearbox that could do 24 hours under the stresses of a sports car. So rather than solve that problem, they solved the problem of how do you change it quickly if it goes wrong. And we took a similar strategy, but we couldn't afford for our customers couldn't afford to do it in the same way that Works Audi were doing it. So Audi would do it by basically having an entire back end of the Le Mans race car ready to bolt on and a quick change of the entire rear end. even to the point where they had all the tools were laid out in the right way. It was completely orchestrated so that you could change gearbox quickly. We came up with a concept of, rather than just changing the whole back end, could we just change the gearbox and make a quick change gearbox as part of the feature of the car, which we did. And we did that with a company called Gemini Transmissions in Brackley. And basically our gearbox casing, rather than being structural, as they mostly are now, and certainly were on IndyCar, we made the gearbox casing plug into a carbon fibre monocoque on the back of the car. So we had a carbon monocoque for the safety cell, then you had the engine and some engine frames, and then you had another carbon monocoque at the back of the car which held the rear suspension and the rear wing and all the structure, and the gearbox basically plugged into the back of that on a set of drawer runners from like a kitchen drawer, and you sort of hook it in, push it in, and then it would engage with the input shaft and you're ready to go. And so the theory being you could pull a gearbox out, plug a new one in, and lose minimum time in the pits, because Le Mans racing at that time was all about how long do you spend in the pits.
The engines used would depend on the customer, with Johansson Matthews Racing and Robinson Racing fitting theirs with Judd V10s for LMP 900 running in the ALMS, Orica fitting a Mopar V8 for an LMP 900 Le Mans effort, and ROC choosing to go in another direction entirely with a turbocharged 2-litre VW inline 4 for an LMP 675 effort. Unfortunately for the LMP 675 runners though, the fact the 2KQ had been built and tested to LMP 900 standards meant that the car was unavoidably around 40 to 50 kilograms over the 675 kilogram minimum weight, costing some potential performance. However, this would prove not to be the 2KQ's biggest issue. The 2000 American Le Mans Series saw some trouble for the Reynard runners. Daytona had gone middlingly for the high downforce trim Johansson Matthews racing car, finishing 4th in class in a disappointing 23rd overall, but Sebring saw both the JMR car and the Robinson racing car retire, the former with engine trouble and the latter with gearbox woes. Sebring would be Robinson Racing's only entry with the Reynard that year, leaving the remainder of the North American rounds of the ALMS solely in the hands of Johansson Matthews Racing and their pair of Judd V10-powered LMP 900 Reynard 2KQs. The team's results weren't terribly bad, but lots of reliability trouble and a car that seemingly just wasn't fast enough kept them from ever achieving a podium either in class or overall, with a best-in-class finish of 4th and a pair of 5th place overall finishes at the end of the season. The LMP 900 car's troubles were highlighted in the Nürburgring round of the ALMS, which saw the French ROC team beat Johansson Matthews Racing decisively. Why is that interesting? Well, it's because ROC was using a Reynard 2KQ chassis as well, and running in the LMP 675 class with a 2-litre Volkswagen engine. ROC finished 1st and 2nd in their class and 6th and 9th overall in Germany, way ahead of the 24th place LMP 900 Johansson Matthews Judd car. So what was going wrong?
The original plan with the 2KQ and a legendary designer at Reynard and Chevron, Paul Brown, was chief designer on the car. His concept was to have a very, very high downforce, what he called in fact a street fighter ALMS car for the American circuits, which were generally slower, more twisty, and would benefit from having superiority in terms of downforce. So the original concept of the car, the one that we built first, was going to America to race at Sebring and Daytona and other circuits. And that carried this high downforce kit. And the high downforce kit had, if you ever look at some pictures of it, this enormous splitter on the front and a very bluff wheel arch. And that was all to generate front downforce, because generally you were front downforce limited. You could generate quite a lot of downforce on the rear with just a big rear wing, but you had to balance it at the front. So the original car was a very high downforce aero package. That's the 2KQ. The compromise of high downforce is usually it also comes with high drag. So this was also a high drag car. Now, there were two problems I think we had. First, with limited testing, we had difficulties with getting the front splitter to work effectively, because it was a big structure. It was flexing a little bit. When it flexes, you get porpoising because you get the aerodynamic surfaces changing a lot. So it wasn't easy to get a balance. Sometimes you could unexpectedly lose front grip, and those sort of things aren't good for predictability in a race car. But also it was draggy. So places like Daytona on the banking and the straight lines, it wasn't fast enough. That was the high downforce aero pack, but we had already in plans and in the wind tunnel the Le Mans kit, the 2KQLM kit, because we knew that by the time we'd finished at Daytona and Sebring, next stop for some of those teams was going to be Le Mans, and you need for Le Mans, absolutely, you need a low drag, which then means a lower downforce aero pack.
The 2KQLM would be wielded by 3 teams running a combined 5 cars at Le Mans in 2000. Stefan Johansson's outfit showed up with a single car LMP 900 entry, Chrysler Mopar entered 2 of their 6-litre V8 cars in the same class, and as previously mentioned, the French ROC team would contest the LMP 675 class with their VW powered machine. Unfortunately, of the Reynard chassis entered into that race, only one would survive the full 24 hours. That being the number 6 Oreca Mopar car, which finished 10th in class and 20th overall. The rest didn't even make it halfway, all succumbing to some form of engine failure. Given the failures included 3 different engines from different manufacturers, however, this can hardly be considered Reynard's fault. Despite this, the poor performances in both ALMS and Le Mans badly tarnished the Reynard 2KQ's reputation, with some even going so far as to label the car the worst customer racing car ever. In retrospect, this seems to undoubtedly be a result of mismatched expectations. The firm had become known for winning on debut in the arenas it chose to enter and had pre-sold 10 2KQs partly off the back of this mythical resume.
Selling 10 cars off plan before we'd even sort of tested or had any customer drives in the car wasn't necessarily unusual, because there was a lot of expectation of the ability. So yeah, there was a big gap in expectations, and the car, as I say, didn't have the right aerodynamic strategy, unfortunately. To start with, it was polarizing.
Valid or not, and in spite of the fact that the LM Spec 2KQ had solved a lot of the initial aerodynamic issues with the car, this left Reynard with a PR problem. Who on earth would buy the worst customer car on the planet? The solution though was simple enough. Build a new car. So what were the key differences between the 2KQLM and the upcoming 01Q?
Primarily it was just the name, and we took the opportunity to rename the car at that point so that it didn't carry the same stigma of the previous project, but that became the 01Q.
So with the fresh, all brand new, never before seen 01Q ready to right the wrongs of the 2KQ, preparations were underway at customer teams to maximise their chances of victory with the new car. After the subpar results for Johansson Matthews' LMP 900 ALMS entry in 2000, Dick Barber Racing decided to try out the LMP 675 class in the series instead. Armed with 2 cars powered by 3.4-litre Judd V8s, the team made their debut at Donington Park, round 3 of the ALMS and the first crossover race with the European Le Mans series. Only one of Dick Barber Racing's cars was ready for their debut event, and unfortunately it suffered a clutch failure 24 laps in. But the next round at Jarama in May would be the best result yet for a Reynard LMP car in ALMS. The number 5 car won in its class, and finished 3rd overall in the hands of Didier de Radigu and Eric van der Poel, behind the 2 Audi Sport R8s and ahead of Stefan Johansson's R8. To interrupt a podium sweep for the most formidable LMP machine of them all shows just how much potential the LMP 675 Reynards had, and for Dick Barber Racing, it was the beginning of a very successful year. Back in the States, they claimed class victory in every remaining round of the 2001 ALMS, and despite not making it back to the overall podium, the car had proven itself to be a consistent and quick racer. Dick Barber Racing won the LMP 675 class in ALMS 2001, ahead of the Nissan-powered Lola cars of Rook Nighthawk Racing, and they also tied on points with the winning LMP 675 team in the ELMS that year too. The 01Q also made it to a lesser-known European championship called the FIA Sports Car Championship. This series used the same basic class structure as the Le Mans series, but LMP 900 was called SR1 and LMP 675 was called SR2. A team called Redmond Bright competed in the SR1 class of FIA Sports Car with a Judd V10 powered Reynard 01Q. Their best result was 4th at Monza, which is absolutely an impressive result, but Redmond Bright's year with the car panned out much the same way as Johansson's 2000 ALMS LMP 900 entry, and the results never really came their way. Two teams contested Le Mans in 2001 with Reynard chassis, including Dick Barber Racing, but unfortunately both their cars were unable to finish the race, with the first suffering a race-ending accident just 4 laps in, and the second catching fire on lap 95. ROC, however, the team that had fitted their 2KQLM with a VW engine in 2000, was back again with a single-car entry. The hope was that the reliability troubles were over, and with just one car, that desperately needed to be true for them to have any chance of making an impact. Luckily, the car survived the whole 24 hours, and better yet, it did well. Like, really well. Qualifying had seen the MG Lola outfit take class pole in LMP 675, but on race day both their cars suffered trouble, with one springing an oil leak and the second keeping its oil but losing the ability to pressurize it. For ROC, who had qualified just behind them in their class, this represented a golden opportunity, and they took it. After a grueling 24 hours, the VW-powered ROC Reynard 2KQ LM won the LMP 675 class in the hands of Jordi Jean, Jean-Denis Delatraz and Pascal Fabre. Better yet, they climbed through the field steadily through the race and ended up 5th overall, in what was a highly competitive field. Nobody was happier about this than VW Group, whose brands populated 4 of the top 5 spots, with Audi R8s finishing 1st and 2nd in the LMP 900 class, Bentley's EXP Speed 8 finishing 3rd overall and winning the LMGTP class, and of course the VW-powered Reynard in 5th. Achieving such an impressive result with a car that was known to be overweight and have a lot of headroom for aerodynamic optimization raised some questions.
And when you did the maths, it was quite clear that if you built a pure LMP 675 car with no compromise, it should actually be able to win Le Mans outright. We had Volkswagen support with the engine. They were very keen to do something with it, and it was Le Mans and Adrian Reynard, myself, Will, a guy called Otmar Safdie, who worked at Reynard at the time before he became a Formula 1 team principal, and the head of Volkswagen Motorsport. We flew back from Le Mans with Adrian on his jet, and we discussed the opportunity of doing something around a 675 car for Le Mans that was a no compromise. What would Reynard do with all the resources that Reynard had, particularly around aerodynamics, to build an LMP 675 customer car that, in theory, could win Le Mans outright.
Despite the 2KQ/01Q finding success after a tricky start to life, a new car was viewed as the best way to maximise their chances of success. With the 2KQ platform only being around for a couple of years at this point, I asked Kieron if there was any carryover between that existing car and the new Reynard O2S.
So they all had 4 wheels, a gearbox and an engine. There was no carryover. We started with a complete clean sheet of paper. The philosophy had to be no compromise.
With the 2KQ's primary issue having been identified as the aerodynamic characteristics of the car, an area of particular focus for the team as they began development of its replacement would be the aero profile. BMW's 1999 Le Mans winning V12 LMR had pioneered the asymmetric rollover structure, a neat little trick that hugely decreased the frontal area of the car and allowed better airflow to the important rear wing and body surfaces. This concept would be key to the development of the O2S.
So not only this asymmetric monocoque, but also our side pods, our engine bay, rear deck, all had to be minimum surface area, frontal area. And the compromise with that, the difficulty with that, is that you don't have anywhere to put your radiators. And so what we wanted to achieve was a very, very small radiator package in a small side pod. And if you look at the side pods on the O2S, they're not even stepping height. And the way Ben achieved that was by creating a very, very low pressure area behind the car and drawing air through the car. So I guess before I go any further on aerodynamics, I should also make sure I don't lay claim to being the aerodynamicist that pioneered or was that really made this car so successful. The two key technical people that really drove this car were Will Phillips, who was the chief designer, who I'd obviously brought in as part of the program previous. And then we worked with a guy called Ben Wood, who did the aerodynamic package on the vehicle. I guess the common misconception with radiators and aerodynamics is that air's pushed through a radiator, and it's actually not. The way a radiator works most effectively is by having a big pressure differential across. And if you can present air to the front of the radiator and you've got a very low pressure behind it, you will suck air through the radiators. And that's what we did. If you look at the O2S, it's got this enormous whale tail mouth at the back of the car, and almost a Venturi. If you look at it in section, there's a dip in the middle, and that, like the diffuser underneath, accelerates the air through the car. So we're actually creating a huge low pressure area behind, pulling air through the car and drawing air from the front of the car under the splitter, which also helps create downforce. So we're generating air from the front of the car through the radiators and out the back.
The O2S looked to be a very promising prospect, and hopes remained high throughout its development that it would be able to deliver results on the track. But unfortunately, fate had other ideas. The O2S was being developed for 2002, but towards the end of 2001, it was becoming clear that the company's financial situation wasn't as solid as it once had been. And right as construction of the first O2S chassis was nearing completion in early 2002, Reynard ran out of money and entered administration.
Essentially, it became a victim of a market scenario, really. IndyCar was a really, really interesting and lucrative place for Reynard to sell cars, and there's therefore had been quite a big focus on America and IndyCar. At the same time, and the reason why I guess IndyCar was so important, most of Europe for the lower Formula categories were going to one make series. So Formula 3 had gone one make, Formula 3000 had gone one make, and as soon as you do that, you remove the opportunity for anybody to go and build cars and try and sell cars in those categories. So a lot of the markets had changed, but sadly, in America we had the 9/11 event, and 9/11 event caused economic instability in America. And IndyCar was big business. There was some big sponsors involved in IndyCar. Drivers were being paid very, very well. And it all got a little bit out of hand, I guess, from a commercial point of view, to the point they felt it wasn't sustainable. And so the teams came together and decided that rather than buying new cars, new equipment all the time and competing with each other, there should be some stability in the regulations around chassis supply. And one of those was to I think it was a 3-year chassis rule. So now the cars had to be used for 3 years as a minimum. And that almost switched off the Reynard IndyCar market overnight. It'd gone from being able to supply 30, 35 cars a year plus spares to just a spares business. And as I understand it, the business was not able to restructure quickly enough. We'd gone from, you asked earlier how many people when I joined in '93. In '93 there were 60 or so people at Reynard. By the end there were well over 200, maybe 300 across the world, because we had locations in Indianapolis to support the IndyCar teams. We had 2 wind tunnel programs in the UK to stay competitive, because the other thing was Reynard dominated IndyCar, and the only way it dominated IndyCar was by staying ahead of the competition, and Lolo were always trying to get back in there, and the only way you could stay ahead was improve, more and more wind tunnel programs, more and more R&D activities, more and more engineers, more and more updates and developments. So the facilities at Brackley had expanded. So yeah, it was quite a big business at the end when it unfortunately toppled. By March 2002, the car was fully designed. It was fully designed in terms of most parts for manufacturing had been released. We built monocoque. We crash tested the car. We had a full set of suspension, but at that point, no further work had continued, and we had got to the point where we'd sold 2 cars to customers, or we had agreement to sell 2 cars to a customer. But to finish the car, we still needed to complete some aero mapping and some aero testing. We still needed to do some composite bodywork components, and there was quite a lot still to manufacture to be able to assemble and put the car together.
With the O2S being so close to completion, especially with the lofty ambitions it had been designed to fulfill, it would have been a tragedy for the car to simply vanish. Thankfully, that didn't happen.
During the administration process, the sports car program was sold to a company called International Racing Management, IRM, and the car was continued to be built as an IRM O2S, but now it was also with the support of Bill Gibson at Zytec for the engine. So the engine had gone to a V8, and myself, Will, pulled together the team that we'd been working with at Reynard, because this all happened very quickly during the admin process. And we pulled together the team with Zytec support, with IRM, and actually put everybody back almost in the office where they'd been based at Reynard before. We managed to do a deal with the landlords on that, and we continued to build the car. So we didn't have to move it anywhere. We carried on building it in the old Reynard facilities, but we did it with a bit of a smaller, more agile team, and the objective was to get the first car up, running, racing at Road America at Atlanta, Petit Le Mans, in 2002, which is about around October time. So it was still an LMP 675 car, and it always, as I mentioned earlier, that as a customer car, they need to be able to accommodate different engines. Yeah. And so there wasn't, the V8, the Zytec V8 had already been packaged for that vehicle. The car had been package protected for the V8, but it wasn't our intention initially. It was going to be a Volkswagen car as the first off. So at that time, we had manufactured bell housings that fitted the Volkswagen engine, so we needed to make the Zytec bell housing. That was pretty much the only changes. Everything else had already been designed. There were some configuration changes of exhaust systems and water cooling systems and so on that went in. But no, it was already, reasonably well intended that engine was going to be packaged.
The O2S made its racing debut on the 12th of October 2002 at the Road Atlanta Petit Le Mans, competing in the LMP 675 class with a Zytec V8. Unfortunately for RN Motorsport, the car suffered a cooling system failure and retired from the race on lap 133. A true shakedown of what the new car was capable of remained a prospect for the future. Earlier the same year, however, the older 2KQ-LM of ROC had come second in its class at Sebring, and the VW-powered car had won the LMP 675 class at Le Mans for a second year in a row in the hands of Delatras, Pillon and Lechner Jr. A third consecutive class win in 2003 for the VW-powered 2KQ-LM, with 19th and 15th place overall finishes in 2002 and 2003 respectively, established the 2KQ as probably the single most successful LMP 675 racing platform to date. For a car that had been lambasted as a failure almost immediately, and had been built by a company that no longer existed, the 2KQ-LM's success was nothing short of awe-inspiring. In 2003, however, the ghost of Reynard inhabited more than just Noel Del Bello's 2KQ. After running its debut race under the Reynard manufacturer tag, IRM and RN Motorsport would rename the O2S for 2003, now running it as the DBA4 03S. RN Motorsport's car sported a Zytec V8. At Sebring, they suffered a gearbox failure, but Le Mans saw a second-in-class finish behind the VW-powered 2KQ. Their primary arena in 2003, however, was the FIA Sports Car Championship, in which John Nielsen, Andy Wallace and Hayanari Shimoda would face off against Doma, Ascari and Lola, amongst others. Shimoda and Nielsen managed second in the opening round at Estoril, before Shimoda and Wallace scored the team's only victory of the year at Oschersleben in Germany. With another second place finish at the 500 km of Spa, the 2003 season had been good for RN Motorsport. But they weren't at the top. It was good enough for third in the SR1 Teams Championship, and likewise Shimoda scored third in the Drivers' Championship. From 2004, the LMP classes at Le Mans, and more broadly, changed. The LMP 900 and LMP 675 classes would be phased out, and in their stead would be LMP 1 and LMP 2. This wasn't just a name change either, with significant work being done to increase safety.
So whilst we were at Reynard and part of the sports car team, or sports car environment I suppose, we worked on the technical working group for the FIA for the regulations, and there were annual and other regular meetings that helped define what the future regulations were going to look like, and making sure that regulations reacted to things that were happening at the track and at events. And sports cars had for some time had a little bit of an aerodynamic instability that probably wasn't fully well understood or really acknowledged as being a safety problem. But there were a number of accidents. There was a Porsche GT1 that took off in Atlanta. There were the Mercedes GT1 cars that took off at Le Mans. And those are the sort of the famous ones. And then there were many other events where sports cars became unstable in certain conditions. And 2 of those were in testing with OEM cars. One of those events led to a driver's death, and it was becoming quite apparent that there were issues around the aerodynamic stability of sports cars. So the FIA quite rightly put together a working commission to fund and develop what was the what's the cause and therefore how can we do something about it aerodynamically in terms of the regulations that make the cars safer. And there were a couple of safety issues that, or a couple of things happened. Firstly, there was a focus on the structure of the vehicles themselves to make sure that if they were compromised, that the safety cell protected the driver better. And so immediately, and these regulations were implemented in 2004, as you said. But the things that perhaps were most notably different outside between the 2 cars, previous regs and 2004 regs, was the safety cell. So you now went from the asymmetric single roll hoop was banned, and you now had to have a symmetrical rollover structure on both what they call the driver and passenger side of the car, although there's not room for a passenger. But the drivers do sit offset from the centre line. So that was the most noticeable external difference. But then the other aerodynamic changes that you could start to see when you look into detail is that the front and rear overhangs of the car were significantly reduced. We went smaller rear wings, and underneath the car, the bit that's less obvious was that we'd now gone from having a diffuser that started at the rear wheel centre line to a diffuser which was almost a bit more like a tunnel system, but diffusers that went much further forward on the underbody, and also, most importantly, the chassis, the floors were no longer completely flat. They now had a chamfered side to them at the point of the side pods to the centre of the car, and before that, LMP cars had this enormous 2 metre by 2 metre flat bottom, essentially. And what we did in the working group was we ran some wind tunnel tests, we ran some CFD models, all of this done by the constructors, people like us and Worth Research and Delta Motorsport. We're all putting research into this to support the FIA and help develop a set of regulations that were aimed at making the cars more stable, and most importantly, more stable in the circumstances that were unusual. So following a car closely behind and finding suddenly you've lost front downforce and the car lifts, or a puncture or a suspension failure which causes the car to take a strange attitude, which again would cause problems before. And the chamfered floor, the main objective of that is if then all else fails and the car is unstable and it starts to spin, instead of going 90 degrees to airflow and actually becoming a wing in its own right and generating lift, the chamfered floor was aimed at creating a neutral aerodynamic position so the cars were safer and easier to recover. The other bit that you'll notice, I guess, big visual difference was the fin in the middle of the engine cover, and that was a stability yaw to try and create some self-correcting measures, but also helps with this aerodynamic stability of the not becoming a wing. The ACO have always been very good at making sure regulatory impact doesn't decimate the grid. So they have good grandfathering rules, and there was no different with the introduction of 2004 aero regs. You could continue to run the old cars as long as you had taken some measures that again were defined by the working group to make them safer and also to slow the cars down.
With moderate success in 2003, IRM started receiving orders from potential customers for the DBA03S or its successor. IRM, however, wasn't equipped to actually build these new chassis from the ground up, and so they instead approached Zytek to outsource construction of the cars and sell them to customers. The resulting Zytek 04S was changed minimally from the Reynard 02S/DBA 03S of the previous couple of years. This wasn't the only lineage though. After 2003, the FIA Sports Car Championship dissolved, and with this having been the primary focus of RN Motorsport's racing efforts with the original chassis, they took the decision to sell the car on to Creation Autosportif. To help develop the car moving forward, Creation Autosportif partnered with a relatively new engineering firm called KW Motorsport. The experience Kieron Salter and Will Phillips had working at Reynard during the development of the original O2S would be invaluable to any team attempting to derive a new car from the platform. There was also what could be considered a third branch of this family tree, also with heavy involvement from KW Motorsport, but we're putting a pin in that one, we'll come back to it shortly. At Le Mans in 2004, Creation and Team Jota, both attempting to enter with an O2S derived car, were not accepted into the event. Zytek was, but unfortunately suffered an engine failure 167 laps into the race. The trusty VW-powered 2KQ also didn't see the end either, suffering an unfortunate accident on lap 122. Zytek, Creation and Jota would all also contest the inaugural season of the Le Mans Endurance Series, the spiritual successor to the defunct European Le Mans Series. Creation Autosportif fared the best of the bunch, claiming 2 third-place finishes across the 4-race season to take 4th in the LMP1 team standings behind 3 Audi R8s. Jota and Zytek were a more distant 6th and 8th overall respectively. For 2005, Creation replaced their Zytek V8 with a 5-litre Judd V10, while Zytek and Jota continued to use the 3.4-litre V8. The LMES was much more successful the second time round, with Zytek taking victory at the championship's opening round, the 1,000 km of Spa, in the hands of John Nielsen, Kasper Elgaard and Hayanari Shimoda. Then, at the next race in Italy, Team Jota crossed the line in second place, behind the winning Pescarolo C60. Race 3 at Silverstone saw Creation finish second too, just 7 seconds behind the winning Audi R8 after nearly 6 hours of hard racing. Race 4 at the Nürburgring was host to a second win for the Zytek team, this time driven by Shimoda and Tom Chilton. And at the season's final race in Istanbul, Creation, Zytek and Jota finished 3rd, 4th and 5th respectively, ending what had been a highly competitive year for the teams on a suitably competitive performance. In the end, Zytek, with their 2 victories, took 2nd place in the championship standings, a very narrow 2 points behind the winning Pescarolo Sport outfit. Creation and Jota finished 5th and 6th. Unfortunately, Le Mans 2005 was less fruitful for our protagonists, with Zytek being turned away, Jota forced to retire 22 hours in thanks to some crash damage, and Creation relegated to a mildly disappointing 14th overall, 48 laps behind the winning Audi R8. For 2006, Jota dropped out, leaving Zytek's 1-car 06S entry and Creation, who were now running a pair of highly modified V10 powered cars named the CA06H. Creation managed an admirable 4 podiums across the 5-race season, including 2nd and 3rd at Donington, but the year was totally dominated by the Pescarolo Sport Run Courage C60, which won every single round of the championship. Neither Zytek nor Creation was able to make a significant impact at Le Mans either. The reality was that these O2S-derived cars had run their course, and by the end of the 2006 season, the regulatory runway that had allowed older cars time and modifications had run out. For 2007, both Zytek and Creation Autosportif would build entirely new cars, ending the final embers of Reynard's involvement in LMP racing 5 years on from their dissolution. Rewinding the clock to 2003 though, and we pick up from the split. Zytek and Creation Autosportif are going their separate ways with the O2S, but a new entrant has entered the fray with an older O1Q chassis. Team Nasamax ran the car in 2003 with a Cosworth V8 to little success, conking out of the 24 Hours of Le Mans with a fire. But for 2004, they were cooking up something special with constructor KW Motorsport.
So I became involved in that project at the point where they'd chosen the chassis. And I think it was probably for the reasons that you just said. It wasn't in huge demand, so it's probably relatively cost effective. There wasn't a constructor around anymore dictate how it's managed and how it's homologated. So I think it was a good candidate, actually, but also it was the way it was designed and the modularity of it meant that you could make the changes that were being proposed. And actually, that car became a hybrid of a number of different technologies. So it was a Reynard 01Q chassis and body package. It ended up having in its first life a Reynard IndyCar rear end. So it was a good candidate for being a donor for that particular project. Probably because also being a Garage 56 car, it's not necessarily just about performance, it was about technology demonstration and other outputs.
Despite the Garage 56 designation we know today becoming official in 2012, new technology has had its place at Le Mans for a lot longer, and the Nasamax DM139 would be the first car to successfully contest Le Mans powered by bioethanol, using a modified Judd V10. The DM139 was also the first car to be homologated under the new LMP1 rules, having been built as a rules hybrid car for the very first year of the updated regulations, meaning the car is forever branded as ACO LMP1 001. At Le Mans 2004, the car would be driven by Robbie Sterling, Werner Lupberger and Kevin McGarrity, and the team were allowed a larger fuel tank than their LMP compatriots thanks to their use of biofuel.
I was on the pit wall with that car. I found that hard work. That's, you've got to be awake for the 24 hours of the race, but you've also got to be awake for 10 hours before the race and 10 hours probably after the race. And every 13 laps the car coming around, you've got to be alert and aware. It's hard work. Your brain's stretched as it is. And then we found that midway through the night we had to make some unusual fuel calculations to cope with the inability or the availability of fuel and when it was going to be available to us, because we were running in Garage 56, which was right into the pit lane, and it didn't have the same capacity fuel tanks as others, and we had perhaps been running a bit longer in the race than the ACO had expected us to continue to run for. And so we had to make some calculations about how we're going to manage the fuel and fuel efficiency, and that was a really tough thing to do in the middle of the night, 2 o'clock in the morning. But that's why endurance racing is so much fun, actually, because anything can happen.
Despite the fuel situation, and the fact the car developed a misfire during the race, the Nasamax soldiered on to finish a respectable 7th in its class and 17th overall. Team Nasamax also contested a couple of rounds of the LMES, and the car showed flashes of pace, even managing the highest recorded top speed at Monza, coming in at 198 miles an hour or 318 kilometers an hour. But despite the straight line speed, the biofuel car was never quite able to match up to its rivals consistently enough, and with Nasamax encountering money trouble themselves, Le Mans 2004 would remain the car's career highlight. So what happened when Reynard decided to build a customer racing machine for the LMP class? Well, a lot of success. The bad press around the 2KQ and Reynard's subsequent insolvency could easily paint a bleak picture of the program to those who looked no further. But the 2KQ LM became the most successful LMP 675 car at Le Mans, and the 01Q won ALMS in its class and went on to make history, ushering in a new era of prototype racing at Le Mans. The O2S and its derivatives were dependable cars for a few teams for years and years after they could have simply disappeared, and all these stories together paint a picture of one of the most unique and interesting successes prototype racing has ever seen. Thanks for watching. The full interview with Kieron Salter is available right now for channel members. Click the join button below to get instant access and support Automobilistic. The interview will release publicly a week after this video is published. A special thank you to all our existing channel members. Your support is appreciated immensely. I also want to take a second to thank Kieron for taking the time to sit down with me and share his knowledge and experience. It was fascinating to get such a great and intricate insight from someone so deeply involved. I'd also like to thank Howe for helping to organise this interview. If you've made it this far into the video, leave a like and subscribe. It costs nothing, and it helps us continue to share fascinating motorsport stories like these for free for everyone. Until next time, goodbye.